Welcome back, guys, and I just want to do a quick video on. I often get asked either about a problem with their plants, somebody's plants. They'll share images with me, and or I will be asked what are the signs of this particular problem, and we're going to talk a little bit about watering and overwatering and how do I keep my plants watered correctly without having a problem. All right, so first off, let me just make sure that I'm clear on this. We're mostly talking about peppers and tomatoes, and we're mostly talking about these types of plants that are going to either be potted or self-watering buckets or things like that. We're not talking about plants that are going to be planted in your garden, because I generally don't water those plants out there once they establish themselves. So mostly what we're talking about when we talk about watering and overwatering, we're referring to plants that are going to be potted in general. So let's just keep that in mind as we're discussing this. So one of the things I often get asked is, how do you know how much to water, and how do you know if you're overwatering? Let's say with tomatoes, for example. Well, one of the first signs I look for with tomatoes when I'm overwatering is the yellowing color with the tomatoes. The stunting is another problem. And or it'll start wilting. If you overwater your tomato plants, oftentimes they'll wilt because they're literally drowning. Their roots are drowning in water. And what happens is when you overwater, the roots can no longer take up water, and so because it's waterlogged, obviously, and so the plant begins to rot, and then it just dies. It's virtually, it doesn't always kill that per se when that happens. In other words, tomato plants are they're very resilient plants, so they don't always die. But because the root system that's rotting away is attached to the plant, sometimes and more often than not, the plant will actually get diseased, and then it'll travel into the plant and kill it. But believe it or not, a lot of times plants like tomato plants can overwater below it, and because of that reason, the whole lower root system will rot away. But the upper part of the plant, even though it's wilting and suffering, it'll actually start rooting at the nodes outside of that plant, and it'll continue to grow in its wild and native environments. So it will continue on. It just won't. It needs to. You can't leave the roots exposed. I mean, you can't leave the roots submerged into water. It's got to be exposed to air to some degree. So, and you got to be careful how often and how you water. It's got to be a semi-regular type of thing in general. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. But I just want to tell you about the signs of overwatering, and then we'll talk about how I water and how much I water. So one of the signs of overwatering is oftentimes you'll see yellowing at the lower leaves. I just did a video on calcium deficiency, so it's very similar to a calcium deficiency. We're talking about tomatoes at this moment. But one of the things you'll notice with overwatering, and some of these plants might be getting a little overwatered because I'm doing a general watering, and so some pots dry out and other ones don't. And the ones that don't are getting watered anyway where they shouldn't be, but I'm not isolating. I'm just kind of broadcasting my watering regimen. And so what you see, oftentimes when you overwater, what you're going to see is you're going to start seeing a rotting on the leaves. And that's not blight, that's just because the root system's beginning to rot. It's not taking up the water. Oops, broke a leaf. Another instance of overwatering, you'll see over here, like you see some of the leaves are starting to rot on the plant, and then I can't show it. Like over here, you can see there's some necrosis. It's becoming necrotic a little bit. You're getting holes in the leaves. They're rotting out. These are all signs of overwatering. That's generally the two signs that I know that the three things you want to look out for when it comes to overwatering is a lightening of the color, not necessarily yellowing, but light. The plants tend to be very light. Sometimes bluing in the veins. You'll see the veins of the plant get blue, but some tomato varieties do this naturally, so I don't always go by that. Or sometimes temperature changes. As temperatures get colder, you get more red light from the sun because it's setting back. You'll start getting a lot of purpling. So I don't always go by that. The main thing I go by is the color of the leaves. I also go by the way the plant is growing, because I see my plants every day and I can kind of get an idea how much they're growing per day. And when that kind of stops and the plants start to get lighter in color, it's still making fruit, that you're fine with that, but you'll notice these things start to happen in stages. So the first thing I look for is the plants start getting light in color. They're not quite growing like what they were, maybe 3 inches a day at some point, and now they're just basically stopped. They're not stunted, but they stopped. And then The other thing I look for is the rotting leaves on the lower part, because the plant's just trying to get rid of the old leaves, and that's just one of the side effects of overwatering. So you'll oftentimes see lower leaves starting to fall and rot. Those are very common signs. Those are mostly what I look for. The other obvious thing from overwatering is usually associated with blossom end rot. So if you start to see the bottoms of your tomatoes rotting, that's usually associated with blossom end rot. So when you see the bottoms of your tomatoes, or sometimes the sides, but usually the bottoms of the tomatoes, they'll start getting black. That's blossom end rot, and that's usually associated with either inconsistent watering, or it's associated with overwatering. Usually it's associated with overwatering. That's usually a direct sign that it's just rotting because it's soaked. The indirect watering part of blossom end rot is just simply the plant is drying out too quick, probably because it's root bound, like you see them in the pots here, and then you have to constantly water it, and because of that reason you're doing that, they'll end up with blossom end rot. So some plants are more susceptible to it, but some aren't. But oftentimes when you see blossom end rot, you know you're overwatering. You need to cut back on the water, and you have to water more frequently. So in other words, when I water my plants, I just gotta give them a spray, and then I generally, I don't go with a deep watering unless the plants are very big. Once my plants get to about 4 or 5 feet, I literally have to give them a deep watering constantly just to keep up with it, because they'll suck a pot dry in probably about 20 minutes. I'll fill that whole pot up to the top with water. 20 minutes later, that thing's bone dry. They literally will soak up gallons of water. So yeah, at some point you have to water it heavily, but when the plants get big, you gotta water your plants according to the amount of foliage you have. So you can see my plants here, they got a pretty good amount of foliage on it, but that doesn't necessarily mean I need to soak that pot for 5 minutes. You gotta water the plant more frequently, but just smaller amounts. So I come out here 3-4 times a day. I'll give it a light spray if it looks like they're drying out. If they're not drying out, I leave it alone. Just leave them alone. They don't over. It's so easy to overwater in pots and get blossom end rot because you think that you need to water it, and it just gives you rotten tomatoes. So don't overdo it. Just give it a chance. Let it work itself out, and be consistent with the way you water. If you're going to water 3 times a day, water 3 times a day. Don't water 3 times a day, like 2 days a week. Next week you don't water for 2 days, and then you water it again, then you soak it with water because you missed watering, and that's when you start ending up with problems. Now, when we're talking about peppers, oftentimes, overwatering and underwatering seem to be very prevalent with peppers. One of the main signs of overwatering with peppers, obviously, is the same situation. Your peppers will get very light in color, and when you underwater, it'll also do the same thing. And that's kind of true with tomatoes too. Tomatoes, they can get light in color, but they'll start wilting if it gets too dry. Peppers can live quite a long time without any water at all. They can almost live, if it's not too much in direct sun, they could literally grow without water for very long periods of time. And they'll be nice and green and everything. They don't need a lot of water per se, unless they're in direct sunlight. If they're getting like maybe 4 hours of sunlight a day and the rest is like indirect sunlight, these plants you almost never have to water, even in pots, because it just doesn't dry the pots out, and the plants do really good like that. So you got to be really careful with peppers. Generally, when I water with peppers, I generally just give them a spray, back and forth, I spray, and then that's it. And then I'll either come back later in the day, I'll check them. If the pots look like they're dry, I'll give them another spray. And when I say give them a spray, I'm literally wetting the leaves down. You see how I wet my leaves down? You see how my leaves are all got water on them and stuff? I do that with plants, especially in the beginning, because the plants, they drink some of that water right directly through the leaf. It seems to really help the plants come along in their beginning stages of their life. And once the plants get really large, then in general I don't really mess around too much with that, and I just start bottom watering them and stay with that, because the bigger upper canopy of the plant is already developed, and the stalk of the plant is already turned to wood, and you don't need to worry about any failures in the system. It's already established. And so I'll do heavier bottom waterings with fully developed plants, but new plants like this, I tend to give them a sweep with a top. I try to emulate as much like natural rainfall as possible. That's what I go for, and that does several things. It washes the leaf surface off from any dust or stuff like that. It also allows the plant to it just revives the plant for some reason. I don't know if they drink the water through the leaf or what, but when you do that, the plants tend to respond to it very well. You just got to be really careful doing that because you could end up with blight on your pepper plants too. So you don't do it forever. You just do it in the beginning when your plants start to snap back and you're not yellowing per se anymore because you overwatered. The plants will start to take that water in through the leaves because they foliar feed, but they do take in moisture through the leaves. And then you're giving the root system below a chance to equalize and dry out and stabilize. And then once it gets to that point, the plant will start growing. Its root system will start to expand out, and now you can start to absorb the water at the right rate that you should have been watering it at. And then the plant starts to go again. But if you overwater, they're just not going to want to grow. They're going to turn yellow, and that's a very common sign of overwatering. So yeah, that's basically it, guys. I just wanted to give you a quick, answer to some of the people's questions asking me about overwatering and how much should you water. Like I said, with tomato plants in general, I just if they're in the ground, that's a totally different story. Oftentimes I don't even water my plants ever when they're in the ground. Just in the beginning when I first transplant them, but in the greenhouse when they're in pots, I just basically give them a good spray. Unless there's like certain pots that are literally drying out in like 5 minutes. Some of these pots, you don't need to water for a couple days. Some of these pots, you have to water every 20 minutes. I mean, they literally suck the pot dry every 20 minutes. So, yeah, you got to keep an eye on it. Some pots, for some reason, they drink more, others don't. And because of that reason, you just got to keep a close eye at it, to be honest with you. And so, like I say, when it comes to the watering part, I just give them a good spray like that. And then I come back during the middle part of the day when it's really, really hot out in full sun, and I look at which ones are drying out. And then I'll specifically focus on those and give them more water. And then at the end of the day, I check it once more. And once I check it by the end of the day, once I check it its final time, I look at the way the pots are, and if I need to give it a little watering, then I'll give it then. Oftentimes, I just want to mention too, oftentimes people ask me also, when should you water? Believe it or not, in my opinion, the best time to water is at nighttime. The plants seem to absorb the water the most. It has time to and this goes for the fertilizing part of it too. You can fertilize and water, and it's better at night. The problem with watering at night is that's where the diseases really do their most damage. So I don't recommend watering at night, but the plants really respond very heavily to watering at night. They really like watering at night. Whereas in the daytime when you water, it's better because you prevent the blight, and they need that fresh blast of water during the daytime so they can really, so they can grow in the direct sunlight because they need that extra water. But it really depends on the circumstances with tomato plants. The same thing with pepper plants. Generally with pepper plants, they don't need a lot of water until they're really big and they're 4 or 5 foot tall plants, and you got to water them really heavily just like tomato plants. However, again, you can water them at night. It's good, but the problem is watering at night. It attracts slugs, and slugs will absolutely destroy your peppers and your plants. In general, I avoid watering at night because of that reason. Not so much because of blight. Generally, my pepper plants don't get blight, but the slugs is a problem. So that's why I don't like to water my plants at night with peppers. If it wasn't for the slug problem, I'd give them a nice dosing at night. Not heavy. Again, we're just spraying it. We just want to just spray the surface a little bit. And that's it. Once the plants start to get to around 2 feet tall, and they're really starting to bump like that, then I start giving them a little more water. Not too much, but I start to feed them directly out of the pots. I'm not spraying anymore. I'm actually filling each pot up with water. All right, so that's it, guys. Hopefully, if you have any questions on that, just comment below. Hopefully I answered your questions as far as how you should water. Maybe I'll shoot a video or do a live stream later today, and we can, answer your questions on watering and the other stuff that we were talking about. So that's it, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you on the next one. Take care.